A year after my husband's death, I thought the deepest pain of my life was over. I returned home with a clear decision I would finally tell my son and daughter-in-law the truth my husband had kept hidden for years. But before I entered the room, I heard their voices through the slightly ajar door. They didn't know I was there. And what I heard in that moment made one painful truth clear. Some people don't wait for you to speak before betraying you. They've been preparing for it for a long time. Thank you so much for being here with me. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to this story. Before we continue, let me know in the comments where are you watching or listening from today. I always love seeing how far these stories reach. And just a quick note before we move on, some parts of this story are intentionally fictionalized for entertainment and learning purposes. Any similarity to real names or situations is purely coincidental, but the message is meant to be meaningful and helpful. 1 year. Today marks the first death anniversary and the wound still bleeds. I stand in the parlor of Magnolia House, my fingers tracing the edges of William's photograph. The frame is mahogany, his favorite wood. Behind me, the altar I've arranged holds white magnolia blossoms fresh from the garden and 3 sticks of incense burning low. The smoke curls upward like a prayer I can't quite articulate anymore. Eleanor Patricia calls from the hallway. The caterers are here. I nod without turning. Tonight, Derek and Jennifer arrive for dinner, our first family gathering since we buried William last spring. In our tradition, the first death anniversary calls for a meal, a remembrance, a small ritual to honor the space where someone used to stand. The magnolia petals scatter across the mahogany as I breathe. William loved this tree. He planted it the year we bought Magnolia House 52 years ago. The first spring, it bloomed so abundantly that neighbors stopped by just to photograph it. "It's a sign," William whispered, holding my hand under those white flowers. "A sign we made the right choice." Now the tree stands in the backyard, older, gnarled at the base, still faithful. This morning I cut the finest blossoms for his altar. The kitchen smells like rosemary and roasted lamb dishes William favored on his birthday. I've recreated them deliberately, not to torture myself, but to remember that he was real, that he ate and laughed and complained about my cooking being too fancy for a simple Tuesday night, that he existed, and his absence is the proof. A year ago, I wouldn't have believed I could survive this. The silence, the empty chair at the dinner table, the way the house groans differently now that only my footsteps echo through the halls. But grief, I've learned, is not a wave that drowns you once. It's a tide. It comes and goes. Some days I forget he's gone for whole minutes. Other days like today, the remembering hits me fresh as though the funeral was yesterday. My phone vibrates. A text from Derek. "Mom, we're running 20 minutes late, traffic from the city." I don't respond. Derek has been distant since William died, pulling away, working longer hours at his restaurant, avoiding the house. Jennifer tries harder, but even she seems uncomfortable in these rooms now, as if William's absence is somehow contagious. I light 2 more incense sticks and whisper a silent prayer. "Watch over them," I say to his photograph, even when they don't know they need watching. Through the parlor window, I see the magnolia tree swaying in the wind. Its branches are bare now. Late autumn has stripped most of the blossoms. But there's a tenderness to it anyway, a skeletal beauty that speaks of endurance. The tree will bloom again next spring. It always does. This is what I've learned in a year. Loss doesn't diminish love. It deepens it. William is more present in absence than he ever was in the constant dailiness of life. I see him in the garden he designed, in the house he protected, in the recipes he loved, in the way light falls through these windows at sunset. Tonight, when Derek and Jennifer arrive, I'll serve dinner. We'll speak carefully around the edges of his name. We'll avoid looking at his empty chair. But the room will hold him anyway, in the magnolia blossoms, in the incense smoke, in the weight of remembrance that binds us together. I'm not ready to let him go. I don't think I ever will be. But I'm learning to live with him differently now. And perhaps that's the real meaning of a first death anniversary, not an ending, but a transformation. Derek answered on the 3rd ring, his voice carrying that particular flatness that told me he'd been working. I could almost see him sitting at his desk downtown, probably staring at something his assistant had just handed him, annoyed at the interruption. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hello, sweetheart. I hope I'm not catching you at a terrible time." There was a pause, a beat too long. I'd learned to recognize those pauses over the years. They meant Derek was calculating something, deciding which version of himself to deploy. No, it's fine. Everything okay?" The concern in his voice sounded rehearsed. That should have bothered me more than it did, but I was still wrapped up in the warmth of my own decision, still flush with the hope that this dinner would change something between us. "Everything is perfectly fine, actually. Better than fine. I wanted to invite you and Jennifer to dinner, here at the house, this Friday evening, perhaps." Another pause, shorter this time. "Friday. Yeah, I think we can make that work. What's the occasion?" I hesitated, but only for a moment. There was no reason to spoil the surprise. "Let's just say I have something important I'd like to discuss with you both. Something that concerns the future." "The future," he repeated. I heard something shift in his tone, a quickening of interest that made my chest tighten with something between hope and dread. But I pushed the dread away. Derek was my son. Whatever his flaws, whatever distance had grown between us, he loved me. Didn't he? "Yes, shall we say 7 o'clock? I'll prepare something special." "Sure, Mom, 7 on Friday. We'll be there." He said it firmly, as if he'd already made some internal decision about how the evening would go, as if he was committing to a performance rather than a dinner. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment listening to the Charleston afternoon breathe around me. The house seemed to settle into a new kind of waiting. I could feel it, that shift in atmosphere that happens when you know something significant is about to unfold. I moved through the preparation with more care than I usually employed. The good china came out the Limoges that had belonged to William's mother, the crystal glasses that we only used for occasions that felt consequential. I selected a menu that would take time to prepare: a standing rib roast roasted root vegetables from the farmer's market, a proper salad with fresh herbs from the kitchen garden. Dessert would be a chocolate torte, something decadent enough to signal that this wasn't just any dinner. As I worked my hands moving through the familiar rhythms of cooking, something unexpected happened. The hope that had crystallized during my Magnolia vigil began to deepen and expand. I found myself imagining how the evening might unfold. Derek and Jennifer would arrive. We'd have cocktails on the veranda, perhaps admiring the last light of the day. Then we'd sit at the dining table, the long mahogany one that William had inherited from his grandfather, and I would explain my vision. How I wanted Derek to take on more responsibility. How I believed in his capability. How this gift wasn't just about property or profit, but about legacy. Derek would be moved. He would understand what I was offering, not just an inheritance, but faith. And Jennifer practical. Jennifer, who always seemed slightly skeptical of my warmth, might finally see why I'd been such an important part of Derek's life. We could be a family again, I told myself as I slid the roast into the oven. Not the family we had been, but something new, something built on mutual respect rather than obligation. The smell of beef and rosemary began to fill the kitchen, rich and promising. I felt it settle over me like a blessing, that particular satisfaction that comes from preparing something beautiful for people you love. The oven timer glowed softly in the dimming light. Friday couldn't come soon enough. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Derek was spending that same afternoon with his wife in their downtown condo, not discussing how grateful he felt, but how desperate he'd become. The dinner I'd planned for this evening: roasted lamb with herb butter, fresh magnolia blossoms on the table. William's favorite Bordeaux was no longer about a new chapter. It was about survival. Derek arrived earlier than expected, just after 4:30. His Lexus pulled into the drive, and I watched from the parlor window as he emerged, already scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight. He didn't notice the magnolia petals scattered across the front step. "Derek," I called as he entered, "you're early." "Mom," his voice was clipped. "Jennifer's running late, traffic." He wandered into the living room, and I returned to the kitchen, checking the lamb. Through the archway, I could see him pacing near the window, his phone pressed to his ear before it even rang. Whatever he was waiting for, he was braced for it. At 4:47 p.m., the call came through. The ringtone, sharp, insistent, unfamiliar, made him flinch. I paused, knife suspended over rosemary sprigs. "Hello." His voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, this is Derek Hartwell. I set down the knife and moved to the edge of the archway, close enough to hear, but hidden by the wall's shadow. I know what I owe you, Derek was saying. His voice shook. 30 days. Yes, I understand the terms. 30 days. The words hung in the air like smoke. 450,000. The voice on the other end confirmed. Deep measured, devoid of emotion. 30 days, Mr. Hartwell, or we move to collection. I can get it, Derek said. Give me time. I have assets. My mother's... A pause. The other man had said something. I couldn't make out the words, but Derek's face went white. No, I'm not calling back. I understand. 30 days starts now. The line went dead. Derek stood motionless for a long moment. Phone still pressed to his ear, then slowly lowered it. His hands were shaking. Lucas Sterling. I didn't know the name, not yet, but I would learn it. The way Derek's entire body had responded to that voice told me everything. This wasn't a business dispute or a casual debt. This was fear, the kind that rewires your nervous system, that makes you capable of anything. I retreated into the kitchen, my own hands now unsteady. 30 days, $450,000. Derek slumped into a chair in the living room, his head in his hands. I heard him exhale long and shaky like a man surfacing from underwater. That's when I realized he would do something desperate. Not because he wanted to, but because that voice on the phone had left him no choice. I thought of the magnolia tree in the backyard planted by William 52 years ago. It survived storms by bending, not breaking. It survived winters by going dormant, conserving its strength until spring. But Derek wasn't the magnolia. Derek was the storm. At 5:00 p.m., while he was still sitting in that chair staring at nothing, I heard him move toward the foyer. He'd decided something. His phone was in his hand again. He was calling someone. A woman. Jennifer, he said, his voice low and urgent. We need to talk, not on the phone. Can you come early? I didn't wait to hear her response. I moved quietly to the foyer where Derek had passed through moments before, and that's when I saw it, a manila folder partially obscured beneath the mahogany sideboard, as if it had slipped from his briefcase when he'd rushed to answer that first call. My heart stopped. I glanced back toward the living room. Derek had moved outside to the veranda, his voice barely audible through the glass doors. I reached down and pulled the folder free. Inside, a deed to Magnolia House with my signature, except it wasn't my signature. Below that, bank transfers, legal documents, all forged, all bearing my name. My hands went cold. This was what Lucas Sterling's call had precipitated. This was the plan already in motion. I closed the folder and held it against my chest, my mind racing. Derek would discover it missing within the hour. Jennifer would arrive soon. The evening would unfold, and I would have to sit at that table, serve that lamb, and pretend I knew nothing. But I knew everything now, and everything had changed. If you're still here, comment 11, so I know you're still with me. And if you were in my place at that moment, would you keep listening to uncover the truth or walk away to protect yourself? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And just a quick note. The next part of this story includes some dramatized elements created for storytelling and educational purposes. If you'd rather not continue, you're free to stop the video here. I didn't plan to eavesdrop. That's what I told myself as I stood in the hallway outside the guest sitting room where Derek and Jennifer had disappeared 20 minutes earlier. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made you listen harder. You're sure? Oh. Jennifer's voice cut through the silence. Sharp. Clinical. Not the tone of a wife shocked by bad news. The tone of someone hearing confirmation of something she already suspected. Derek's response came softer, almost defeated. Lucas called this morning, said if I don't have it by when? Jennifer interrupted, and I heard the smile in her voice. That smile. The one she wore at country club dinners when she was calculating something. 30 days. A pause. Then Jennifer laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a sympathetic one. The laugh of someone who'd just been handed exactly what she'd been waiting for. 450,000. Jennifer repeated the number like she was tasting it. Derek, that's not even difficult. Easy for you to say. Derek's voice carried an edge of desperation. Lucas doesn't care about difficult. He cares about payment. Then we get the payment. I heard fabric shift Jennifer moving closer to him or away. Your mother has real estate, significant real estate. The Magnolia House alone is worth, what, $2 million? The mention of Magnolia House made my chest tighten. My Magnolia, the one William and I had restored together brick by brick over 15 years. Jennifer, I can't ask Mom to sell. You're not asking. Her voice turned smooth, almost gentle. Dangerous gentle. You're going to suggest it, casually. Financial consolidation, simplification. Things mothers understand when they're thinking about legacy. Derek didn't respond immediately. I could picture him, that uncertain expression he'd worn since childhood, when confronted with something he knew was wrong, but wanted to be right. And if she says no, he finally asked, she won't. Jennifer's certainty was absolute. But if she does, we have options. I've already looked into the deed transfer process. The documentation can be adjusted. It happens all the time with family properties. Adjusted. The word hung in the air like smoke. You mean forged? Derek's voice was hollow. I mean handled, Jennifer corrected smoothly. There are people who specialize in estate transitions. Very discreet, very efficient. Your mother never has to know the paperwork wasn't entirely conventional. I felt my throat go dry. This is insane, Derek whispered, but his protest had no weight behind it. What's insane is owing Lucas Sterling $450,000. Jennifer's tone suggested patience, like she was explaining something simple to a child. This is practical. This is survival. This is what people do when they're backed into corners. Mom will find out. Eventually she'll... By then it won't matter. Jennifer's footsteps moved across the hardwood floor. Toward the door, I realized too late. Toward where I was standing. I stepped back quickly, my hand fumbling for the stair railing. My pulse hammered in my ears as I moved away one careful step at a time, trying to make it look natural in case anyone emerged. Behind me, Derek's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it. Okay, just one word, but it contained everything. The capitulation, the choice, the line he'd crossed. I reached the kitchen and gripped the edge of the counter, staring at the roasted lamb I'd prepared earlier, now cooling on the serving platter. Magnolia House. My Magnolia. My Williams' final investment, our sanctuary. And they were planning to steal it. Not with guns or breaking and entering, with paperwork, with lies dressed up as legality, with my own son's signature on documents that would erase my claim to something I'd built, something I'd cherished, something that was supposed to be safe. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, a woman I barely recognized, a woman who'd just learned that the people she'd invited to dinner tomorrow night were already plotting against her, a woman who'd already been outmaneuvered, or so they thought. The dinner began at 7 o'clock as planned. Jennifer arrived with a bottle of white wine and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Derek stood when she entered the dining room, pulling out her chair with the kind of practiced gentleness that made my stomach turn. They were nervous. I could see it in the way Jennifer's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass, in the way Derek cut his lamb into smaller and smaller pieces without actually eating much. I'd prepared everything. The table was set with Williams china, the magnolia blossoms arranged in a low vase so we could see each other's faces. The candles cast a warm glow across the room, creating the illusion of intimacy. Eleanor, this is beautiful, Jennifer said, gesturing at the room. Really? Thank you. It's William's death anniversary. The words landed and I watched Derek's jaw tighten. He knew what this dinner was supposed to be, a remembrance, a renewal, a family gathering to honor the man who'd built this legacy. Instead, it had become something else entirely, an interrogation disguised as intimacy. Of course, Jennifer said softly. We're glad to be here. Were they? I studied her face, the careful composure, the way she glanced at Derek before speaking, the slight tension in her shoulders. She was performing. They both were. How's the restaurant? I asked Derek, passing him the salad. Busy, he said, too quickly. Really busy. We're thinking about expanding to a second location. A lie, or at least a distraction. I knew Derek's restaurant was struggling. I'd seen the bank statements months ago. He'd asked me for advice, and I'd suggested he cut costs, not expand. But now, with Lucas Sterling's debt hanging over his head, suddenly expansion was the answer. Expansion meant access to credit. Credit meant liquidity. Liquidity meant money to pay off a loan shark. That sounds ambitious, I said mildly. It is, Jennifer interjected. Derek's been working toward that for a long time. Another lie, or another performance. I sipped my wine and watched them both. They were trying so hard to seem normal, so hard to appear unchanged by whatever had transpired between Derek's panicked phone call at 4:47 p.m. and Jennifer's arrival 2 hours later. But I could see the fractures in the way they didn't quite meet each other's eyes, in the way they both seemed to be holding their breath. Your mother used to talk about legacy, I said to Derek, my voice gentle. She said that what we leave behind is more important than what we accumulate. Derek set down his fork. I remember. She was right, I continued. This house, this table, these conversations, they matter because they're the record of who we are. Not what we own, but how we treat each other. Jennifer suddenly became very interested in her lamb, Mom. Derek started, but I cut him off gently. I'm not criticizing. I'm just thinking out loud. William would be thinking about legacy tonight, about what he built and what he's leaving behind. There was a long silence. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in the evening breeze, its branches bare and skeletal against the darkening sky. The house is beautiful, Jennifer offered finally. You must be so proud. I am, I said, though I know it requires upkeep, repairs, investment. I watched Derek's face carefully. He understood what I was implying, or at least he sensed it. Everything requires investment, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. But some investments matter more than others. Dessert came a chocolate mousse that William had loved. We ate in near silence, the only sound the clink of spoons against porcelain, the crackle of the fire in the adjacent room. When it was over, I stood to clear the table. Let me help, Jennifer said, rising. No, I said. You two relax. I'll just get these. As they settled into the living room, I carried the dishes to the kitchen, moving slowly, deliberately. I could hear them whispering urgent, low voices, planning, strategizing. I set the dishes down carefully and smiled to myself. They had no idea that I already knew everything. Tomorrow would begin the real work. Tonight I would simply observe, collect evidence, and prepare. By the time they left, I would have memorized every word, every gesture, every moment of their performance. And I would use it all. I didn't put the folder back. Instead, I carried it upstairs to my bedroom, locked it in the antique writing desk where I kept William's letters, and took a breath that felt like the first real one I'd drawn all afternoon. Downstairs, Derek was still on the veranda pacing. I could see his reflection in the kitchen window, a man unwinding a man who just committed himself to something terrible and was still processing the weight of it. I returned to the lamb, my movements mechanical now. Chop, season, turn. The rituals of dinner preparation held me steady. At 5:20 p.m., Derek came back inside. He was calmer now, resolved in a way that frightened me more than his panic had. He'd made a decision. He'd called Jennifer. The machinery of their betrayal was already in motion. Mom, he called from the living room. I'm going to take a shower before Jennifer gets here. Is that okay? Of course, I said. Dinner will be ready at 7. I listened to him climb the stairs, heard the shower start. Only then did I allow myself to sit down. The folder was upstairs locked away. Inside it, everything I needed to know and everything I wished I didn't. A deed to Magnolia House with my forged signature. Bank transfers totaling $1.8 million. An email chain between Derek and Jennifer discussing the logistics of selling my home without my knowledge. All of it precise, calculated, professional in its betrayal. But there was one more element that made my blood run cold. An email from someone named L. Sterling to Derek. Your mother's property will satisfy the principal. 30 days. After that, we move to collection. Understand. Derek's response, yes, I can have the deed executed and the house listed within 2 weeks. We close by day 28. You'll have your money. So the call I'd overheard Lucas Sterling demanding payment was the catalyst. Derek owed him money, serious money. And the house was the solution they'd already planned to implement. How long had they been scheming this days, weeks? How many conversations had taken place while William was dying, while I was grieving, while I was preparing to honor his memory tonight? I set the table with William's good china. The magnolia blossoms I'd cut that morning seemed to mock me now, their white petals pristine and innocent. At 6:50 p.m., Jennifer arrived. I heard her car pull up, heard Derek come downstairs freshly showered and changed. They embraced in the foyer, a performance of normalcy that made my skin crawl. "Eleanor," Jennifer called out, entering the dining room with a smile. "The house smells incredible." "Thank you, dear," I said, and I meant it in a way she couldn't possibly understand. I was thanking her for showing me who she really was. Derek pulled out Jennifer's chair. They sat across from each other at the table, and I served the lamb, the roasted vegetables, the herb butter. We clinked glasses to William's memory. "To William," Derek said, his voice steady and warm. "A man of integrity." The word landed like a stone between us. I watched them eat, watched them exchange careful glances, watched them perform the role of loving son and devoted daughter-in-law. And I understood for the first time that grief doesn't make you noble. It just makes you aware of what you're willing to sacrifice. They were willing to sacrifice everything, their integrity, their honor, their relationship with me for money, for survival, for Lucas Sterling's deadline. And I had to decide what I was willing to do about it. I took a sip of William's Bordeaux and made a silent promise to him I would protect what he'd built. Not with anger or confrontation, but with strategy, with evidence, with the law itself. By the time Jennifer asked for seconds, I'd already decided. Tomorrow I would call Patricia. Tonight I would smile and serve dessert. But inside I was already planning how to save my legacy. The package from Anthony arrived at 9 in the morning on the second day. I recognized the weight of it immediately. Legal documents always felt heavier than they should. Inside the manila envelope was everything: bank statements, transfer authorizations, and something else. Something that made my breath catch. A deed transfer document for Magnolia House. My name was on it. Eleanor Hartwell seller, Derek Hartwell buyer. The price listed was half what the property was worth, a discount that only made sense if it was never meant to be legitimate. But what caught my attention was the signature line. I pulled out the authentication documents. Anthony had included copies of my legitimate signatures from the estate accounts, my power of attorney filing. Bank documents I'd personally signed over the years. I spread them across my desk like pieces of evidence in a trial. Then I looked at the signature on the deed transfer. My E at the end of Eleanor should have a slight upturn, a habit from decades of signing documents. The forged signature had a downward curve. My authorized documents showed a consistent pressure, a confident stroke. This one was hesitant, uncertain, the signature of someone imitating rather than embodying. But there was more. The deed also bore William's signature. William, who had been dead for 1 year. The handwriting was even more obviously false, too controlled, like someone had studied a sample and tried to replicate it mechanically. I sat back in my chair, holding the documents with trembling hands. They hadn't just forged my signature, they'd forged William's. They'd created a dead man's consent to the sale of his legacy. The audacity of it, the sheer desperation and arrogance made something inside me crystallize into absolute clarity. I reached for my phone. Samuel Wright answered on the first ring. "Mr. Wright, it's Eleanor Hartwell. I need to show you something." My voice was steady, which surprised me. "I have a deed transfer with forged signatures, mine and my late husband's. Can you still meet with me today?" "Today?" His tone shifted immediately. "Eleanor, if this is what I think it is, it is. They forged my signature and my deceased husband's signature to transfer my property. They created legal documentation of a sale I never authorized." I held the deed up to the light, examining the ink. "There's also a pattern of unauthorized financial transfers totaling over $100,000. Where are you?" Samuel's voice had taken on the urgent quality of someone who just understood the scope of what was happening. "At home, Magnolia House." "I'm coming to you. 1 hour. Don't speak to anyone until I arrive. And Eleanor..." He paused. "Do you have the originals of these forged documents?" "Yes. Keep them somewhere safe. These are evidence of felony fraud. Multiple counts if both signatures are forged." After I hung up, I carefully placed the documents back in the envelope. My hands had stopped shaking. Fear had transformed into something colder, something more useful. I thought about Derek, my son, sitting in my study just days ago listening to his wife outline how they'd steal from me. I thought about William, whose signature they'd exploited even in death. I thought about the magnolia trees outside, flowers beginning to fade as autumn approached. They had made a mistake, a critical one. They hadn't just underestimated my intelligence. They'd given me everything I needed to end this, not just as a family dispute, but as a crime. My phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Mom, Jennifer and I want to take you to dinner tonight. Celebrate." Celebrate. As if the papers had already been signed. As if I'd already agreed. As if my house was already theirs. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything, taking screenshots of the financial transfers, photographing each page of the forged deed, with careful attention to the signatures, creating a digital record that would be admissible in court. 1 hour until Samuel arrived. Then everything would change. I waited until afternoon to call him. Samuel Wright had left my study at 2 o'clock, the forged documents in a secure folder, his legal strategy outlined in precise detail. Now it was 3:15 and Derek would be back at his office, vulnerable, unprepared, still believing he controlled the narrative. "Derek," I said when he answered, "I need you to come home now, Mom." His voice carried that hesitant quality of someone caught off guard. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, just come home." I hung up before he could ask more questions. He arrived 40 minutes later, still wearing his office clothes, still carrying the casual confidence of someone executing a plan he believed was foolproof. I was waiting in the study, the same room where I'd listened to him, and Jennifer plot the same room where I'd examined the forged documents. The same room where Samuel Wright had confirmed every suspicion. What's going on? Derek closed the door behind him. "You sounded strange on the phone." "Sit down," I said quietly. He sat, but his body language was defensive. He didn't know yet. That was the only advantage I had. "Tell me about the Magnolia house," I said. "Why do you want to sell it so badly?" Derek's jaw tightened. "I told you, a new business opportunity, good investment potential. I want to consolidate." "That's the second time you've used that word." I kept my voice level, conversational. "Consolidate. Jennifer used it too, when you were planning this with her." His face went pale. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but his voice had lost its steadiness. "There's nothing to plan. I'm just thinking about—" "The deed transfer," I interrupted. "With the forged signatures, both of them, mine and William's." Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Mom, I don't—" "Sit down, Derek." Something in my tone made him comply, the coldness of it, the absolute certainty. "I have the documents," I said. "The deed, the bank statements showing your transfers to Lucas Sterling, the financial records showing the pattern of withdrawals. I have your forged signature and your attempt to use your dead father's name to legitimize theft." "It's not theft." He started, then stopped himself. Too late. "It's fraud," I continued. "Multiple counts. Document forgery, financial misappropriation, attempted grand larceny. Your lawyer, Samuel Wright, who is now my lawyer, has confirmed every detail." Derek's hands were shaking. I could see the exact moment his mind shifted from denial to calculation, trying to find a way out of the trap he'd built for himself. "I can explain," he whispered. "Lucas, I owed him money and I panicked. Jennifer said—" "I know what Jennifer said. I heard her explain how to manipulate a notary, how to create a holding account, how to transfer my assets before I could file a complaint." I leaned forward slightly. "I've been listening to your plans since before you even told your wife about your debt." "Mom!" "No." I stood moving toward the window. The magnolia tree stood exactly where it had always been, its branches laden with fading flowers. "You made a choice. You and Jennifer decided that stealing from your mother was worth more than honoring your father's legacy or keeping your own integrity. That's what I can't forgive. Not the fraud, not the desperation, the choice." Derek's phone buzzed, a text I assumed from Jennifer. He glanced at it and his eyes widened as he read whatever message had just arrived. He stood abruptly, the chair clattering backward. "Derek, I need to call her," he said, his voice cracking. Jennifer doesn't know you know. She doesn't. He fumbled for his phone, his hands trembling so badly he nearly dropped it. He stumbled out of the study, heading toward the hallway. I didn't stop him. Instead, I picked up the landline extension on my desk and pressed the button that would record the conversation he was about to have with his wife. Evidence, after all, was everything. Samuel Wright's office was exactly as I remembered it. High ceilings, mahogany shelves lined with legal volumes, a window overlooking Charleston's historic district. The magnolias bloomed even here, visible from his desk. He stood when I entered, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, concern, and something else. Resignation, perhaps, at what he already suspected I'd come to tell him. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "William trusted me for 20 years. I hope you know you can do the same." I sat placing the folder on his desk. "I need to tell you what my son has done." For the next 30 minutes, I laid it out methodically. The overhead conversations, the forged deed, the fabricated signatures, not just mine, but William's 3 years after his death. The financial transfers totaling over $100,000. The pattern of desperation that had led Derek and his wife to commit fraud. Samuel took notes, his pen moving with practiced efficiency. When I mentioned the recording, Derek's panicked phone call to Jennifer, captured on the study's landline extension, he looked up sharply. "You recorded it?" he asked. "Yes, after our confrontation yesterday." "That's admissible," he said, then paused. "Assuming we're in a one-party consent state, which we are. Eleanor, this goes beyond a civil dispute. This is criminal." I nodded. I'd known that already. But hearing it confirmed by a lawyer made it real in a different way. Samuel opened the folder, examining each document with the careful attention of someone trained to see what others missed. He studied the forged signatures, comparing them to the authenticated documents Anthony had provided. His expression didn't change, but I could see the moment he understood the scope of what Derek had attempted. "They knew what they were doing," Samuel said quietly. "This wasn't amateur hour. Someone coached them on how to forge documents convincingly." "Jennifer," I said. She was the architect. Derek was desperate and scared, but she was calculating. Samuel looked at me across the desk. "What about the loan shark, Lucas Sterling? How much does Derek actually owe him?" $450,000. 30 days to pay or Derek faces consequences. That's why they targeted the Magnolia House. It was the most valuable, most liquid asset. Samuel set down his pen. "Eleanor, I need to be direct with you. What you're describing involves multiple felonies. Document forgery, wire fraud through the financial transfers, attempted grand larceny. This isn't something we can resolve quietly or privately." "I understand." "I'm going to need to contact the Charleston Police Department. We'll file a formal complaint with documentation. They'll investigate, likely bring in the district attorney's office. This could result in criminal charges." I felt something settle inside me, a kind of relief mixed with sadness. Justice and loss were rarely separate things. "There's more," Samuel continued. "Lucas Sterling. If he's been making threats, if he's operating as a loan shark with criminal intent, he becomes part of this investigation. Derek's debt might actually work in your favor legally. It establishes motive and duress." Derek said Lucas gave him 30 days. I confirmed. The transfers correspond with that timeline. Samuel stood and walked to his window, looking out at the magnolia trees below. "Your son made a choice to commit crimes rather than face consequences for his own poor decisions. That's not on you, Eleanor. But I want you to understand what comes next. There will be police involvement, possible arrest. The family will be devastated. The media may become involved." "I know," I said. He turned back to me. "Are you certain this is what you want?" I thought of William, of the signature they'd forged in his name, of Derek choosing betrayal over honesty, theft over accountability. "Yes," I said, "I'm certain." Samuel nodded. "Then let me do what I do best. I'll file the complaint today. The police will contact Derek and Jennifer within 24 hours. What about me? You cooperate fully. You provide all evidence. You tell the truth and let the law handle the rest." I left his office an hour later. The folder returned to my possession, but lighter somehow, as if I'd transferred the weight to someone trained to carry it. Justice, I was learning, felt less like victory and more like necessity. Samuel called on the morning of the 10th day. "Eleanor, I need to see you today." Something in his tone told me the investigation had uncovered more than expected. He arrived at Magnolia House at 3 o'clock carrying a leather portfolio. We sat in the study, the same room where everything had begun to unravel. "I contacted someone at the bank," Samuel began. "I asked him to look into Derek's financial history. What I found is worse than what you brought to me." He opened the portfolio and laid out documents, bank statements, wire transfers, loan records I'd never seen. Derek was moving money to pay down an existing debt to a man named Lucas Sterling. The name hung in the air between us. "Derek owes Lucas Sterling $450,000. Samuel continued. "2 years ago, Derek invested in a restaurant startup that failed. He lost $90,000. Then he began losing money on online gambling, cryptocurrency betting, sports betting. That's where the additional $360,000 went." I felt something crystallize inside me, terrible clarity. "How long has he known Lucas Sterling?" I asked. 2 years. When the restaurant failed, Derek needed capital. He found Lucas through someone in the investment community. Samuel pulled out another document. "Lucas Sterling operates a shadow lending operation. He provides capital to people desperate enough to take the risk. In exchange, he expects repayment with substantial interest." "How substantial?" "The original $40,000 became $450,000 in less than 2 years, 90% annually, and he enforces collection." Samuel showed me police reports, property damage, intimidation. One case involving a fractured arm. Nothing directly attributed to Lucas, but the pattern was unmistakable. "Derek was trapped," Samuel said quietly. "Every gambling loss led to new borrowing. Every new loan increased the debt faster than Derek could repay it." "Is that why he forged the documents?" "Yes. Before Lucas enforced collection methods that don't appear in official records, Derek was thinking about survival, not your legacy." I looked out at the magnolia tree. Desperation had turned my son into a criminal. "There's more," Samuel said. "Lucas Sterling is under federal investigation. Money laundering, extortion, organized crime. Your son's case might help their investigation." "What do you mean?" "Derek could cooperate. Provide information about Lucas's methods, the loan structure, the threats. Help the police build their case. It might reduce his charges." "Or he could get hurt," I said. "Yes, that's the risk. But Eleanor Derek's debt comes due in approximately 20 days. If Lucas doesn't receive payment, he will collect. He might target Derek. He might target his family. He might come here." The words struck like a physical blow. "What do I do?" I asked. "First, we freeze Derek's accounts immediately. Anything remaining can't be touched by Lucas. Second, we coordinate with police. They need to know the threat level. Third, we prepare for the possibility that Lucas Sterling might target your assets as collateral." Samuel leaned forward, his voice grave. "Eleanor, your son's desperation brought a predator into our town. We need to move quickly." I nodded, understanding that the story had shifted. This was no longer about family betrayal or stolen property. This was about survival against forces far more dangerous than Derek's greed. "What's the first step?" I asked. "I'm calling the police today." Patricia Donovan arrived at my house on the 11th day carrying a bottle of wine and the kind of determination I hadn't seen in her since we were young. I'd called her that morning with a simple request. "I need to talk to you about something serious." Now sitting in my study with the door closed, I laid out everything. The forged documents, the financial transfers, the recording of Derek's conversation with Jennifer, the loan shark, the federal investigation, all of it. Patricia didn't interrupt. She listened with the attention of someone who understood that some stories couldn't be rushed. When I finished, she set down her wine glass. "Eleanor, I will help you however I can." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the kind of loyalty that transcends decades. "I need discretion," I said. "Samuel is preparing the legal documents, but Derek and Jennifer can't know we're coordinating. If they realize how much evidence we have, they might destroy something. Or run. They won't know anything from me," Patricia said. That same afternoon, Samuel arrived with file folders containing bank statements, transaction records, and copies of the forged signatures. Patricia and I reviewed them together, her business background making her invaluable. She understood financial patterns in a way that revealed Derek's desperation more clearly than words ever could. "Look at this timeline," Patricia said, pointing to the transfer records. "The amounts increase as the deadline approaches. He was panicking, transferring money faster as he got closer to the deadline with Lucas. This isn't calculated theft. This is desperation." "That won't matter legally," Samuel said quietly. "But it establishes motive. It shows he was acting out of fear rather than greed." Over the next few days, we prepared everything. Samuel drafted criminal complaints and civil filings. Patricia gathered witness statements from Anthony Harrison, confirming the unusual account activity. We compiled the recording, the forged documents, the financial records into a comprehensive case file. Meanwhile, Derek called me 3 times. Each conversation was the same. "Mom, we should talk about the house sale. Jennifer thinks we should move forward soon." "Your mother needs more time to think," I said each time. Calm, patient, buying time. I could hear the anxiety in his voice, the awareness that something was wrong but not understanding what. Jennifer was probably coaching him, telling him to push harder to convince me. They had no idea that every moment they continued, they were cementing their legal liability. "Let them reveal themselves," I told Samuel on the 15th day as we finalized the evidence package. "Every call Derek makes becomes another piece of evidence. Every time Jennifer tries to convince me to sell becomes another data point showing motive and persistence. We don't need to confront them. We just need to let the system work." "The police are ready," Samuel confirmed. "They have enough to bring charges, but I wanted to confirm, are you sure about this?" I looked out the window at the magnolia tree, nearly bare now, its branches skeletal against the October sky. Derek was my son. That fact hadn't changed, even though everything else had. "I'm sure," I said. "Not because I want to punish him, because he chose a path that brought criminals into my home. He chose to betray his father's legacy. He chose to commit fraud rather than ask for help. Those choices matter, Samuel, and they have to have consequences." Patricia stood beside me at the window. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "Then why does it feel like I'm losing him all over again?" Patricia didn't answer. She just placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture that said what words couldn't. That grief and justice could exist in the same moment. That protecting your legacy sometimes meant letting go of the people who threatened it. Tomorrow the police would move. Tomorrow Derek's carefully constructed lies would begin to unravel. But tonight I allowed myself to mourn who my son should have been. I wasn't supposed to hear this conversation. Derek thought I was upstairs asleep. But I'd been in William's study listening through the open door, my hand pressed against my chest as my heart tried to break through my ribs. He was on the phone. His voice was low, urgent, terrified. "I can't pay you yet, Lucas," Derek said, "but I'm looking at her accounts right now." "Her accounts? My accounts?" I moved closer to the doorway, barely breathing. "I'll give you the access codes to her secondary trust." Derek continued, his voice cracking. "Just stay away from me. I'll make sure she answers when you call to verify." The phone went silent. I could hear Derek breathing shallow, panicked breaths. "Yes," he said. "I'll send you the codes by tomorrow morning. But Lucas, if you threaten her, if you hurt her..." Another silence. Whatever Lucas said made Derek's voice go even smaller. "Okay," Derek whispered. "Okay, I understand." The line went dead. I pressed myself against the wall, my mind reeling. The secondary trust. William had set that up 15 years ago, a separate account, liquid assets, roughly $800,000 in bonds and cash reserves. He'd intended it as security, a buffer against life's uncertainties. He'd never imagined his own son would trade it away like currency. Derek didn't move for several minutes. I could hear him sitting in the living room, could practically feel his despair radiating through the house. Then slowly, I heard him climb the stairs. I waited until his bedroom door closed before I moved. My hands were shaking as I descended to the kitchen. I poured myself water, but I couldn't drink it. The glass felt heavy, impossible to lift. Instead, I set it down and gripped the edge of the counter, trying to ground myself granite cold beneath my palms, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the magnolia tree visible through the kitchen window, still and silent in the darkness. Derek had given Lucas the access codes to my trust account. He'd promised that I would answer when Lucas called to verify. He'd traded my financial security for breathing room, and in doing so, he'd made me complicit in my own victimization. I picked up my phone and dialed Patricia's number. It was nearly 11, but she answered on the second ring as if she'd been waiting. "It's me," I said quietly. "I heard Derek. He's giving Lucas the trust codes, the secondary trust Williams security account." Patricia's voice sharpened immediately. "How much?" "800,000. I heard her exhale. "Eleanor, that's federal crime, wire fraud, identity theft." "I know," I said. "Derek just made this serious." "Have you called Samuel?" "Not yet." "Call him now," Patricia said. "Tell him what you heard, then we freeze the account before Lucas accesses it." "I know the steps," I said. My voice was steady now. I felt something crystallizing inside me, not anger exactly, but resolve. A clarity that comes when you finally understand what you're dealing with. "I need you to listen to me very carefully, Patricia." "I'm listening." "Tomorrow morning, I'm going to the police. I'm going to file a report for fraud, forgery, attempted grand larceny, and wire fraud. I'm going to provide the recording of Derek's call, the forged deed, the email chain, everything. Eleanor, and I'm going to testify against my son," I continued. "I'm going to stand in a courtroom and tell a judge that Derek Hartwell knowingly and willfully attempted to steal my home and my financial legacy to pay off a criminal debt." The words hung in the air between us. I'd said them aloud now, which made them real, which made me real not as a victim, but as an agent of justice. "I know what I'm doing, Patricia," I said. "I know it means Derek goes to prison. I know it means Jennifer goes to prison. I know the family as I knew it is over. But if I don't stop this now, Lucas Sterling will own me. He'll own this house. He'll own my legacy. He'll own everything William built." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "You're strong enough for this?" she asked finally. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm going to do it anyway." I hung up and dialed Samuel's number. He answered on the third ring, the voice of a man accustomed to midnight crisis calls. "Samuel, it's Eleanor Hartwell. Derek just gave Lucas Sterling the access codes to my secondary trust account. $800,000. We need to freeze it before Lucas can access it." "I'll call the bank's fraud department now," Samuel said. "When can you meet?" 7 in the morning, I said. "My office. Bring everything, the recording, the forged documents, the emails." I ended the call and stood in the kitchen of Magnolia House. William's house, my house. The physical manifestation of 52 years of marriage and legacy, and made a decision that would reshape all of our futures. I texted Patricia. "Call Detective Rebecca Murphy at Charleston PD. I have evidence of federal crime. File a report tomorrow morning at 8:30. Then I locked the kitchen door, climbed the stairs carefully so Derek wouldn't hear me, and went to bed. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, I would sleep the sleep of someone who'd finally chosen herself. Samuel's office felt smaller than before. Or perhaps I'd grown larger. My fear, my resolve, my desperate need to understand what came next had expanded to fill every corner of the room. "Eleanor, sit," Samuel said, gesturing to the leather chair. "There's someone I want you to meet." The man beside him was mid-40s, sharp suit, quiet authority. He introduced himself as Special Agent James Crawford, FBI, Organized Crime Division. "Mrs. Hartwell," he began, "your son's situation is more complicated than simple fraud. We've been investigating Lucas Sterling for 1 year. He heads a sophisticated loan sharking operation across 3 states, wire fraud, extortion money, laundering, the entire apparatus." Samuel leaned forward. "Eleanor, the local police could arrest Derek now for the forgery. That's straightforward. But the feds want Lucas. If we move too early, Lucas disappears and Derek will be in even more danger. We need that recorded call from Lucas to tie them all to an organized crime charge. RICO prosecution," Agent Crawford added, "requires federal coordination and recorded evidence." I felt something shift in my chest. "You're asking me to wait. We're asking you to help us," Agent Crawford said. "There's a difference." He placed a small device on Samuel's desk, a button, a tiny microphone. "This is a wire. If you cooperate with the federal government, you'll wear this. When Lucas calls, we'll be listening. Everything he says becomes evidence: recorded threat, extortion, criminal coercion. And if he becomes violent— My voice was smaller than I wanted. "We'll be monitoring from a vehicle outside your home," Agent Crawford said. "At the first sign of threat, we move in. You're never in danger, Mrs. Hartwell. You're never alone." Samuel placed his hand on the desk. "Eleanor, this gives us everything. A federal wiretap would take weeks. But this, your voluntary cooperation. This is clean. Ironclad." "How long?" I asked. "Days, maybe a week," Agent Crawford said. "Long enough for Lucas to make contact. Once we have his recorded voice making threats, once we have him on tape demanding payment or threatening violence, we take everything to the grand jury. Indictment within 48 hours. Arrest within 72. "What happens to Derek?" "Federal charges," Agent Crawford said. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, identity theft. Minimum 5 to 10 years, but if he cooperates, testifies against Lucas, the prosecutor might recommend a reduction." "He betrayed me," I said quietly. "He gave Lucas the codes to my trust account." "He did?" Samuel agreed. "That's a federal crime, but Derek is also a victim. Lucas owns him now. Derek is trapped between his mother and a criminal. That's not an excuse, but it's context." I picked up the pen and signed the cooperating witness agreement. 3 days later, Agent Crawford arrived at 4 o'clock. "The wire is this button," he said, pinning it carefully to my cardigan just above my heart. "It transmits to a receiver in our vehicle parked 3 houses down. If you feel unsafe, tap it twice. We'll know." That night, I sat in the parlor of Magnolia House, the wire pressed against my heart, and waited. At 9:47 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello." My voice was steady. "Mrs. Hartwell." Not a question, a statement. Lucas Sterling's voice was calm, measured, devoid of humanity. "I believe your son may have mentioned me." "He has," I said. "Good. Then you understand the situation. Your son owes me $450,000. He's defaulted. Now I'm collecting from you." I closed my eyes. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in darkness, its bare branches skeletal against the December sky. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Your son gave me access codes to your trust account. $800,000. I can transfer it electronically today." Or he paused, and in that pause, I heard the edge of his voice sharpen. "I can visit Magnolia House personally and convince you the old-fashioned way. Your choice, Mrs. Hartwell." Every muscle in my body wanted to scream, but I remained calm. "That's extortion, Mr. Sterling." "It's business," he replied. "You have 24 hours. After that, we stop negotiating." The line went dead. I sat in the dark, my hand over the wire, and felt Agent Crawford's presence surrounding me like armor. Tomorrow, the grand jury would convene. By the end of the week, my son would be arrested. But tonight, I had given justice its voice. Detective Rebecca Murphy listened without interrupting as I laid out everything: the forged documents, the recordings, the financial transfers, the threats. Her face remained professionally neutral, but her eyes told me she understood the scope of what my son had done. "This is a comprehensive case," she said finally. "Document forgery, wire fraud, criminal threatening extortion, multiple felonies." I handed her the final folder. Everything was there, organized, labeled irrefutable. "The police will move quickly," Detective Murphy said. "With evidence, this solid arrest should happen within days." She was right. By day 26, Derek was arrested at his office. Jennifer was picked up at their home the same afternoon. Lucas Sterling was apprehended at his business location, his criminal operation already known to federal authorities. The arrest coordinated perfectly with the investigation into his loan sharking network. The trial was brief. Derek and Jennifer's lawyers offered guilty pleas on most charges. The evidence was too overwhelming to contest. Lucas maintained his innocence until the final moment, but his own records damned him. I testified on a Tuesday morning, walking through the courthouse hallway past reporters. The case had attracted media attention, though not for the reasons I expected. The focus was Lucas Sterling organized crime federal investigation, a predatory lending network that had trapped dozens of people like my son. When I took the stand, I recounted what I'd heard that night in my study. My voice stayed steady as I described the forged signatures, the attempted theft, the psychological manipulation. The prosecutor asked careful questions that allowed me to explain not just what happened, but why Derek's desperation, Lucas's exploitation, the cascade of poor decisions that led to criminal acts. The defense attorney asked if I loved my son. Yes, I said, but I love the law more. The sentencing came 3 weeks later. Derek received 4 years in federal prison. Jennifer received 5 years. The judge noted that she had been the architect of the fraud, the one who'd suggested forging my signature and Williams, the one who'd calculated how to manipulate a notary. Lucas Sterling received 12 years plus substantial fines for extortion, criminal threatening, and operating an illegal lending operation. When the judge pronounced Derek's sentence, I felt something break inside me. Not my resolve that remained solid, but something else. The last piece of the mother I'd been before all this. Derek looked at me from the defendant's table. For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in his face. Not the desperate regret of a man caught, but the deep understanding of a man who finally comprehended what he'd done. I didn't look away. After the sentencing, Detective Murphy found me in the hallway. "The case against Lucas will help us dismantle his entire operation," she said. "Your evidence and your son's testimony, if he cooperates, could help dozens of other victims. Will it reduce his sentence?" I asked. "Possibly. The system isn't perfect, but cooperation matters." I drove back to Magnolia House as the sun was setting. The magnolia tree stood completely bare, its branches skeletal against the orange sky. Winter had come and gone during this ordeal, and now spring was arriving new growth, preparing to emerge from the branches that had seemed so dead just weeks ago. The house was mine. The title was secure. The legacy, William's legacy, was protected. But the cost had been my son. I sat in my study as darkness fell, and I allowed myself to grieve, not for the choices Derek made, not for the justice that had been served, but for what he could have been if he'd made different decisions, for the person he might have become if desperation hadn't driven him to Lucas Sterling's door. Justice had been served. The law had worked. The predator had been caught, the criminal had been convicted, and my family's legacy had been preserved. But sitting in the study of Magnolia House, surrounded by the accumulated weight of victory, I understood finally that some battles leave no real winners, only survivors. 6 months after the sentencing, I sat in the garden of Magnolia House and watched the magnolias bloom. They were glorious this year, fuller, more vibrant than I remembered. The blossoms opened in waves pink and white against the Carolina sky, and I allowed myself to believe in renewal. I had written a letter to Derek the night after his trial. I'd never sent it, but I'd needed to write it. My hands needed something to do while my heart processed the impossible reality of my son's conviction. "My dearest Derek, I love you. That will never change, but I cannot give my love to someone who betrayed me so completely. You had choices at every step when you borrowed from Lucas, when you gambled, when you forged my signature, when you gave my phone number to a predator. Each choice led you further from the person I raised you to be. The Magnolia House remains here. Your father's legacy waits, but you must become someone worthy of it. Prison will give you time to think about that. I will not abandon you, but I cannot protect you from consequences you chose. With love and heartbreak, Mom." I'd keep that letter in my desk drawer, a private conversation between a mother and the man her son could have been. Patricia found me in the garden that morning, carrying coffee and concern. "How are you really?" she asked, sitting beside me on the bench. I considered lying. I'd become good at composure these past months, but Patricia deserved honesty. "I'm surviving," I said. "Some days I wake up and I'm still angry. Some days I just miss who I thought he was. But mostly I'm starting to understand that grief and healing can exist at the same time." "That's wisdom," Patricia said. "That's just time," I corrected, "and deciding what comes next." What came next was the William Hartwell Foundation. I'd met with Samuel Wright and our financial advisors 3 weeks prior, finalizing the details. The foundation would use the proceeds from Magnolia House, not the house itself, which would remain my home, but a substantial endowment that would fund grief counseling, financial literacy programs. and support for families trapped by predatory lending. The kind of support Derek should have sought instead of running toward Lucas Sterling. My role would be hands-on. I would oversee the foundation's work, personally attend board meetings, meet with the people we served. I would transform my family's legacy into something that honored both William's memory and the lessons I'd learned through Derek's choices. The other properties, the investment portfolio, the commercial real estate I maintained with new purpose, not for accumulation, but for sustainability, not for power, but for security. I'd hired capable managers, delegated what I didn't need to control, and kept my focus on what mattered, creating something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. "Your father would be proud," Patricia said, as if reading my thoughts. "I hope so," I said. "I think he'd understand why I had to do this." That evening, I sat in my study, the same room where I'd listened to Derek plot, where Samuel had explained the legal complexity, where I'd recorded Lucas's threats. I took out William's photograph, the one from our honeymoon in Charleston, before children and business and betrayal. "I kept the promise, William," I whispered. "I protected what you built. Not by hoarding it, but by using it to help people who are where Derek was desperate, trapped, looking for a way out that doesn't lead to criminals." The magnolia blossoms continued to fall outside my window petals, drifting like snow across the garden. The cycle that had begun a year ago, blooming, fading, dying, preparing to bloom again, had completed itself. I was no longer the mother who'd hoped to pass her company to her son. I was no longer the woman who'd been betrayed and fought for justice through the courts. I was someone new, someone who'd faced loss, chosen principle over comfort, and emerged not unbroken but transformed. The magnolia house stood around me solid and secure. My legacy was safe. My heart was healing. And somewhere in a federal prison, Derek would eventually be released into a world where second chances existed for those willing to earn them. I had forgiven him in my heart, even if I could never trust him again. That I was learning was enough to move forward. Over the past weeks, I've watched Eleanor's journey unfold a narrative about family betrayal law and ultimately redemption. As the storyteller, I want to reflect on what this family drama stories collection has revealed and what it might teach us all. Eleanor's journey wasn't about winning. It was about surviving with integrity. She discovered that loving someone doesn't mean enabling their destruction. In a moment of crisis, she chose truth over loyalty, a decision that cost her deeply, but saved her legacy. This is the core lesson embedded within these family drama stories. Love and justice aren't always in conflict. Sometimes they align when we're brave enough to act. The grandma stories we tell matter. Eleanor represents a growing number of older adults who refuse to be victims. She didn't confront Derek with anger or blame. She gathered evidence, sought counsel, and allowed the system to work. 3 times throughout her journey, she invoked something larger than herself, whether we call it faith God or moral conviction, recognizing that her strength came not from her alone, but from a purpose beyond personal revenge. God's justice, as Eleanor learned, sometimes works through human institutions. God provides wisdom through trusted friends like Patricia and Samuel, and God grants courage when we need it most. What these family drama stories teach grandma stories are not just tales of the elderly. They're stories about resilience, discernment, and the courage to protect what matters. Eleanor's actions protected not only her home, but also her values. She demonstrated that financial literacy and legal awareness aren't luxuries, they're necessities in a world where predators exploit family bonds. My advice to you, if you ever find yourself in Eleanor's position, don't minimize your instincts. Trust the small signs. Document everything quietly. Build your alliance before acting. And remember, protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. This narrative, while dramatized for educational storytelling purposes, reflects real struggles many families face. If you've encountered similar situations, financial deception, document forgery, predatory lending, threatening your loved ones, you're not alone. Have your own family drama stories to share. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found Eleanor's journey meaningful, subscribe for more grandma stories and family drama narratives that illuminate the complexities of love, law, and legacy. Note: Certain details have been fictionalized for narrative impact, but the lessons about family protection, financial vigilance, and moral courage remain universal truths.